Moving on, the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, has said that only 37% of schools across 10 states in Nigeria have early warning systems in place to identify threats linked to school attacks. UNICEF disclosed this in its report, which underlines the 10th anniversary of the mass Chibok abductions in the Northeast, which drew global attention to the vulnerabilities children face in conflict zones, particularly regarding their rights to education. Our correspondent, Emeka Amako, files in this report from Abuja.
Nigeria's achievements in advancing education have remained threatened by protracted conflict and growing hostilities, mostly in the northern part of the country, which has continually fueled school attacks resulting in abductions and the attendant killing of children. 10 years after the kidnap of 276 female teenage students by the Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram from the government girls' secondary school at the town of Chibok in Borno State, not much has changed, as over 90 girls are still unaccounted for. This has necessitated this report released by UNICEF assessing the safety of schools and school premises in Nigeria. Since the mass kidnapping of the Chibok girls, there has been at least 27 episodes of mass kidnappings of students from their schools across the country, with well over 1,863 students abducted.
Many schools are ill-prepared to handle the increasing risk posed by violence, conflict, and climate change. The current infrastructure and safety procedures are not enough, and current training efforts are not yet broad enough to protect children from all forms of violence.
Protecting students, teachers, schools, universities, and other tertiary educations from attack during times of instability and crisis, finding ways for education to continue, and deterring military use of schools as bases are all essential, and they need to be backed up by concrete measures, as we've just heard outlined by UNICEF.
The report captures a broadly low and static implementation of the minimum standard for safe schools, with merely 9 out of the 21 standards met.
We went out to about 6,600 schools across 10 states to understand the extent to which the minimum standards are actually being implemented. And what we found is that on average, states are implementing about 9 of the 21 minimum standards. So less than half of the minimum standards are actually being implemented.
UNICEF therefore calls for intensified efforts to protect the country's most vulnerable population.
Yeah, sure. They were not registered. None of the schools, to my knowledge, that have been attacked so far, none of them were registered. But that does not mean that because they are not registered, they should not be protected. I'm only saying that there is need for us to register them so that we can have timely information. The best form of security is the one you provide for yourself. We are not saying citizens will carry guns and cutlasses and all that. What we are saying is that citizens will be conscious enough to know when to give you alert.
I can confidently tell you that some of the states have made provision for safe schools in their 2024 budget, and we are working closely to guide the states. We are sending templates for them to give us information about the most at-risk communities and most at-risk schools for implementation. So looking at that, no state is going to be left out. Looking at the peculiarities, we have different plans for all the states.
UNICEF says it is working with the government to ensure that every child can access safe learning environment. The agency has supported the inauguration of state safe school steering committees and the drafting of state costed implementation plans for safe schools in 13 states.